In one of our classes recently, someone asked about the word πορεύομαι, which means to go or to travel. They asked, shouldn't this mean I go for myself because it's a middle verb? Well, the answer is no, and in this video, I'm going to explain why and explain the middle voice in a little bit of detail. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Darryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, helping you with the tools, habits, and system to master the Greek of the New Testament without having to look up any words in a reader's edition or a dictionary or anything like that. If you want fluency and freedom in the New Testament, then go download my roadmap to mastery at masterntgreek.com/roadmap. Now, if you've been involved in English, probably you have, right? If you're watching this, I'm speaking English, you probably know English, right? Good chance. Anyway, if you've been involved in the English language, you're probably aware that there are two voices in English. We have the active voice and we have the passive voice. An example of the active voice is the boy hit the ball. Very simple sentence, but the idea is that the boy is the agent, the one doing the action. He hit, that's the verb, the ball. The ball is then the thing that's being hit. Now, the point of an active verb is that the action affects the object in some way, okay? The action affects the object in some way. So the boy hit the ball, the hitting affects the ball. Pretty simple, right? With the passive voice, it goes the other way. The ball was hit by the boy, okay? So in this case, the ball is the subject. The word was hit, that was hit, that's your passive verb now. And then you have by the boy is telling you who's actually doing the hitting. So in this case, the subject is not the agent doing the work, but is the grammatical subject of the verb was doing or was hitting, and it's being affected by the verb, okay? So in this case, the ball is affected again by the hitting, but the boy isn't really made into the subject, okay? That's a passive verb. So in an active verb, it's just simply going in a single direction. It's nice and clear. In a passive verb, the verb is going backwards to the subject, okay? Now, in Greek, we have those same things as well. We have an active voice and we have a passive voice. Pretty straightforward, and they largely work the same. We even have a number of ways of expressing agency in the passive. So hupo plus the genitive, by the boy, right? That would be a hupo plus the genitive. So the middle voice in Greek is a little different to both the active and the passive tense form. The middle voice in Greek has the idea of subject affectedness, okay? And what this really means is that the person who's doing the verb, the agent of the verb, is acting on, to, or for themselves in some way. And that is to say that they've got some personal or vested interest in the action that they are performing. Okay, now somebody once said that this means they have a more direct participation, a more specific involvement, or even some form of benefit for doing the action. That's kind of the idea of the middle voice. Now, if you're finding this helpful, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. That really helps this video out. The key thing here is in the active voice, the agent, the subject of the verb, is doing the action, okay? And it's affecting something else. It's affecting some other thing. Now, in the middle voice, the subject, the one doing the action, is largely doing the action on, to, or for himself, right? So in English, we might say, for instance, you know, I washed myself, right? Which is to say, I went and took a wash and I acted on myself for that wash. We'd use a reflexive pronoun to convey that idea. In Greek, all they would do is just use the middle voice. I wash myself. Now, in Greek, you wouldn't have to add myself, a reflexive pronoun, or anything like that. It's all understood to be in that middle voice. And there's a number of words then that really make a lot of sense to use in the middle voice, like verbs of grooming, washing. And we find these verbs of grooming all around the New Testament. For instance, in Mark chapter 7, verse 4, it says there that unless they wash, they do not eat, right? And the idea is it's a middle voice verb. Unless they wash themselves before, they won't eat, right? They won't eat unless they wash. So the middle voice there is just talking about they're washing themselves, their own hands, right? Mark chapter 14, verse 54. Peter, when he was standing by the fire, remember that? When Jesus was on trial and Peter was standing on the fire, he was warming himself. Again, middle voice is used. And again, you don't need a reflexive verb or anything like that, or a reflexive pronoun in Greek. You can just say he was warming, right? And you use the middle voice, and it's clear that he was warming himself. He was cold, and so he was just getting warm by putting his hands out or standing by the fire or whatever it happened to be. Then, of course, there's places like Acts chapter 12, verse 21, where it talks about Herod having clothed himself. And again, in English, we'd use a reflexive pronoun, but in Greek, we don't need to. We just use the middle voice. He clothed, and then it tells us kind of how he clothed himself, what he wore, and so on and so forth. The idea of adding himself or herself or the reflexive pronoun generally is not something we need in Greek. It's really just an English thing. But sometimes you'll find Greek authors will add a reflexive pronoun anyway. And this is part of the Koine period and the language just getting simplified, and often the nuances of things like the middle voice being lost on foreign speakers, people who aren't speaking the language, and they're not native to Greek. So they might lose some of those nuances and the language just gets simplified. And so that's sometimes why we have a reflexive pronoun even when we already have a middle voice verb. That brings us to the question of deponent verbs. Now, I've talked about deponency on this channel in the past, and if you're interested in more detail on that, click this link up here and you'll jump over to that video. Deponent verbs we don't really refer to deponent verbs today. Grammars that still write about deponent verbs really should not be writing about deponent verbs. Scholars largely agree that deponent verbs are really not a thing. I'll let you watch the video for more details. Here's the thing. We used to think of a deponent verb as a verb that was active in meaning but middle in form. Okay, we think of it in English as an active verb even though it appears as a middle verb. And what we're saying today is no, actually, it's a middle form because it is middle in meaning. But what about with words like πορεύομαι? Like I mentioned, in one of our classes recently, someone asked, shouldn't I translate this as I go for myself or I take myself somewhere? The thing is, we don't have any active forms of this in the Greek New Testament anywhere. So the active form doesn't appear. However, it does appear in some older texts. So in Plato, for instance, πορεύω is an active form that does appear in some of those earlier Attic texts. And when we find it there, it doesn't mean I go. It means I convey. And so when we look at this in the middle voice, if we're going to say I convey myself, πορεύομαι is a very logical way of expressing that. The middle voice has subject effectiveness, and therefore to bring it into the middle voice to say I travel or I go makes total sense. And we can see the same kind of logic with erkomai as well. So the point here is to say that really these deponent verbs, the active form may not be as common, but that doesn't mean to say they are totally unused. And it could be that in some cases these deponent verbs are really ready to be used and we should expect to see them somewhere, but maybe not in the New Testament corpus. Anyway, the point is that middle verbs, verbs that are middle only because something about the middle voice is inherent to the meaning of that verb, even if we're not always certain how that works. So that's a quick look at the middle voice in Greek. The idea of the middle voice is subject effectiveness. If a verb only occurs in the middle, it's because it has a middle meaning. You can see how these are a little different to the active voice, where the agent is just acting on an object and just acting, and the focus is on the action. The middle voice focuses not on the action, but the action for the subject, for the one who's performing the action, and the passive is functioning to actually affect the subject more fully, and it may not be even the subject doing the action, it may be somebody else. So that's a quick overview of voices. If you're interested in more, then there's a couple of resources I would point you to. The first one is this brand new book by David Mathewson, Verb and Mood. This is the first in a series of books. This kind of can contribute out to be a more advanced Greek grammar, if you like, over about 16 volumes, I think it is. That's a helpful little resource to get into this. It's got a good section on the middle voice there. The other one I really like, though, as well, is another one by David Mathewson. This is Intermediate Greek Grammar. Mathewson and Emig both did this. This has got a very accessible section on the middle voice, and I commend it to you heartily. This is the Intermediate Greek Grammar I recommend to all Master New Testament Greek students, and I commend it to you as well. Finally, if you're interested in more information on the history of the middle voice and how we understood it, go take a look at Advances in the Study of Greek by Constantine Campbell, and you'll find that there's a chapter in there on deponency and the middle voice generally, which will be very helpful as well from a history point of view. So that's it for this lesson. If you found this helpful, don't forget to hit the like button. If you're interested in learning Greek, go download my roadmap to mastery at masterntgreek.com/roadmap. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.